Have you noticed how the number of people who have started living with cats over the last few years has increased? There are people who spend their whole lives saying they didn't like cats. They never had an affinity for them, never thought about adopting one, and suddenly a cat appears at their gate, another follows them down the street, someone finds an abandoned kitten, and that animal simply enters their life. Within the spiritual view that I follow, not every encounter needs to be treated as a simple coincidence. Cats carry a very ancient spiritual symbolism. You only need to look at different civilizations to realize that this relationship between felines, protection, and spirituality has spanned centuries. In ancient Egypt, for example, they held an extremely special position. And even today, there is something about a cat's behavior that draws attention. They observe things that we apparently are not perceiving. Anyone who lives with a cat knows the scene. Suddenly, they stop, become completely still, and stare fixedly at a spot in the house where there is apparently absolutely nothing. You call them, and they keep looking. At other times, they enter a room and immediately leave, or they choose a specific place in the house to stay for hours. In spiritual tradition, there is an interpretation that cats possess a very keen energetic sensitivity, and it is precisely here that a very interesting question begins. Perhaps some people are welcoming these animals into their lives precisely at times when they need to develop more sensitivity, balance, and spiritual protection. We are going through a period that many spiritualist currents call planetary transition or regeneration. Regardless of the name used, the central idea is a profound change in the way human beings relate to themselves, to other people, to nature, and especially to other forms of life. And perhaps it is not by chance that, precisely in this period, so many people are forming such deep bonds with animals, especially with cats, because there is a very particular characteristic in these animals. They do not necessarily arrive to obey you. They arrive to live with you. And sometimes it even seems like it was the cat who chose the person and not the other way around. When a cat appears repeatedly at your door, starts following you, or simply decides to stay in your home, spiritual tradition may interpret this encounter as a bond that deserves attention. It doesn't mean we should turn absolutely everything into a supernatural sign, but perhaps it's worth asking a question. Why did this animal appear in my life right now? Because there are encounters that seem small when they happen, but that we only understand much later. There is something fascinating about the behavior of cats. They observe people and environments in a completely different way than we do. You have probably welcomed someone into your home and noticed your cat change its behavior. With certain people, it remains calm. With others, it disappears. In some situations, it watches from afar. This does not mean we should decide if someone is good or bad simply based on an animal's reaction. But the cat perceives movements, sounds, smells, body tension, and changes in the environment that often go unnoticed by us. And within certain spiritual traditions, there is yet another interpretation, that they are also extremely sensitive to the energy of environments. That is where one of the oldest beliefs involving cats comes from, the idea that they help in the energetic harmonization of the home. When a cat rubs against you, lies nearby, stays at your feet, or chooses to sleep beside you, there is obviously a behavioral and affective explanation. It has formed a bond with you, but spiritually, this behavior has also gained another meaning over time. Many traditions interpret this proximity as an energetic exchange. It is as if that animal were participating in the balance of that environment. And there is an even more curious situation. Sometimes you are going through an extremely difficult period, and you notice that the cat starts to stay much closer. You are worried, emotionally shaken, experiencing family or professional problems. And it appears, sits nearby, lies down beside you, purrs. We don't need to say that the cat is curing an illness or literally removing a problem from the body. That would be turning a spiritual interpretation into a medical claim. But there is something that I consider very beautiful. He realizes you're not yourself and stays there. Within spirituality, this presence can be interpreted as a form of energetic support. That's why I don't like the idea that cats are cold or indifferent. Anyone who truly lives with cats knows that's not the case. They just show their bond in a different way. And there is also the matter of the black cat. For centuries, a terrible superstition has been placed upon these animals, associating their fur with bad luck. Within the spiritual tradition I follow, the interpretation is practically the opposite. The black-furred cat is often associated with the absorption, transmutation, and protection against dense energies. This does not mean that a black cat is an amulet. It is a living being and must be respected as such. But it is curious to realize how that which for centuries was associated with fear can also represent protection within other traditions. Perhaps the real bad luck was never encountering a black cat. Perhaps it was humanity having learned to fear it. There is a phrase I often hear: I didn't adopt my cat, it was he who adopted me. And perhaps there is more depth to this phrase than it seems. There are cats that appear in the garage, cats that follow someone on the street, the one a child finds on their way home from school, the animal that shows up injured right at the door of that house. And there is the one that simply walks in and decides, I live here now. From a common point of view, we can call this circumstance. Within a spiritual interpretation, we can see it in another way. Perhaps that encounter happened because there was some experience that that animal and that family needed to live through together, not necessarily because some tragedy would have happened without it. We don't need to turn spirituality into fear. The mission can be much simpler and at the same time much deeper. Perhaps that cat arrived to teach a child to respect another form of life. Perhaps it arrived to keep company with a person who lived alone. Perhaps it brought a family closer together. Perhaps it awakened in someone a compassion that that person didn't yet know. Or perhaps within that family's spiritual belief, its presence also represents protection and energetic balance. Notice how this completely changes the question. Instead of, what did this cat come to save me from? Perhaps we should ask, what did this encounter come to teach me? Because spiritual evolution isn't just about talking about dimensions, energies, or entities. There is spiritual evolution in learning to care, in feeding an abandoned animal, in treating a vulnerable being, in understanding that a life depends on our decisions and there is something that needs to be said. An animal is not an object, it is not a decoration, it is not something you abandon because you move to a new address. A cat forms a bond. It recognizes routine, people, safety, and territory. When someone takes responsibility for an animal, there is also a commitment. And spiritually, I strongly believe in what we do to those who depend on us. You can call it the law of return, you can call it cause and consequence, you can simply call it responsibility, but what we do leaves marks. And perhaps one of the spiritual missions of animals is precisely to reveal something that no prediction can hide. Who are we when we are in the presence of a being that cannot offer us money, power, or status in return? Now, there is a bigger question behind all of this. Why talk about cats precisely when we talk about planetary transition? Because within the spiritual view I follow, evolution does not happen only through knowledge. It appears mainly through our attitudes. It is no use for someone to say they are seeking a higher spiritual dimension while mistreating what they consider inferior. It is no use talking about light while there is cruelty inside the home. It is no use seeking spiritual protection while our own choices produce suffering. That is why animals occupy such an important space in this discussion. Perhaps they are teaching us something extremely basic that humanity has not yet fully learned: to coexist without dominating. The cat is particularly interesting because it maintains its independence. It creates a bond, seeks affection, misses you, establishes a routine, but continues to be itself. And perhaps there is a spiritual lesson right there. Not all love needs control, not all connection needs possession, not all protection needs to be born from fear. Within traditions that view cats as spiritually sensitive animals, it is believed that their presence can contribute to the energetic balance of environments. But there is something I consider even more important than discovering if a cat can perceive what our eyes cannot see. It is realizing what it awakens in us: compassion, responsibility, respect, patience, care. And perhaps that is precisely why so many animals are crossing the paths of people who never imagined living with them. Perhaps that cat's spiritual mission is not to face some invisible force inside your home. Perhaps its mission is to transform you. And there is a huge difference between these two things, because when we start looking at it this way, we stop asking only, how can this animal protect me? And we start asking, what do I need to learn from its presence? If we are truly going through a collective spiritual transformation, perhaps the way we treat animals says much more about our evolution than any speech. That is why, when a cat appears unexpectedly on your path, you don't need to immediately imagine that there is something bad chasing you. Observe, care for, respect, and above all, notice what started to change after that animal entered your life, because you might think you opened the door of your house to him, but within this spiritual view, it may be that he has opened another door in you.